The Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, the 4th chapter.
Glory to you.
On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to the disciples, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. I have very fond memories from my childhood of being on the water, going for boat rides with my dad, fishing with my family, or swimming in the lake with my cousins. They were carefree times, getting sunburnt from spending all day near the water, eating fresh fish for breakfast, playing cards every evening, and having a lot of family around. I remember on one occasion of being out fishing with my parents, and a storm unexpectedly arose. And I remember the little outboard motor whining for all it was worth as my dad worked to time the waves just right so that our boat wouldn't get swamped from the waves. It was scary, watching the clouds roll in and the lightning flash off in the distance. I also remember, quite vividly, my first hurricane. You have to remember, I grew up in Minnesota where we don't have hurricanes. And so the storms I was used to were very different from this one. It was Hurricane Fran. And Pastor Scott and I were on internship in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And we were coming home from a youth event on the other side of the state with a carload of high school students, hoping we could get ahead of the storm, but we didn't. It was the most terrifying storm of my life. We white-knuckled our way across the street with the wind howling, and the trees were like bent over almost halfway, and the rain was coming down in these blinding sheets. I had never seen anything like it before. I'll be really happy if we avoid that kind of excitement this week. Many of you, however, I'm sure can relate, because now I'm very familiar with major storms. We are not unfamiliar here with the raw power of nature and the chaos and the devastation that heavy rainstorms or hurricanes can create. So when we hear today's gospel lesson, we can understand the fear that gripped the disciples. As I told the children, Jesus had decided after a long day of teaching to go to the other side of the lake. And as they were traveling across the water, he fell asleep in the stern. Now, the Sea of Galilee is like a teacup. And it's this bowl, and then it's got these hills on the other side. And when the wind comes down those hills, it can whip up the most ferocious of windstorms. And that is what happened as they were crossing the lake that day. So fierce was this particular storm that the fishermen on board, those who have spent their whole lives on the water, begin to panic. And so in great alarm, they wake up Jesus, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Do you not care that we are perishing?" It could very well be our question as well. For we know that we endure storms not just of nature, but within our very lives as well. Life can leave us feeling overwhelmed, swamped, tossed about. When a relationship is struggling to survive, or an addiction has gripped a loved one, when the news from the doctor is not what you were hoping for, when the pink slip is delivered, or when depression or mental illness affects one's ability to engage in life and cope in the world. when we lose independence or self-confidence or hope. There are storms arising all over the world which can leave us fearful and anxious. The heartbreaking situation on the border of our country, school shootings, violence in our streets and in our homes, the rising tide of racism and division. Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Well, the gospel is clear that Jesus does care. Jesus is not indifferent to our storms, to our chaos, to our fears. No, when we bring our fears and worries to him, he comes into them and he speaks a word. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. And then he asks of us what he asked the disciples. Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith? He asks not as condemnation, but as invitation to trust him, to trust that he is present within us, with us in the midst of the storms. It's not that there's nothing to fear, but rather that Jesus will not let us go through the storm alone. One goes with us who commands the winds and the waves, one who holds the future and who will not let us perish. Now, the disciples did not quite get it. Their question is, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Though they've seen him cast out demons and heal many people, they still regarded him only as a holy man, a teacher. They had not yet considered that there was a greater power at work within him. Yet on this occasion, they witnessed him yield a power that belonged to God. Our first reading from Job and our psalm specifically reference the power of God over the forces of nature, of hemming in the seas and silencing the waves. And the disciples are moved to a reverent fear of Jesus, even as they still don't fully understand who he is. Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? In Mark's gospel, it is a Roman centurion who will be the first to see the truth of who Jesus is, and his answer will come in fearful wonder at the cross. Truly, this man was God's Son. God's Son, who is crossing the Sea of Galilee to go to the other side, to go to an unknown foreign territory, land of Gentiles, to a people long counted as outsiders and beyond God's love. God's Son, who restores life to a little girl and heals a woman who has been outcast from her community. God's Son, who challenges the status quo and the privilege of the ruling class, calling for compassion and justice for the poor and oppressed. God's Son, who feeds the hungry and blesses children. God's Son, who prays and leans on the power and promise of the Father. God's Son, who suffers and dies out of love for the world, a world that rejected him and his message of love and salvation. God's Son, who is raised from the dead, conquering the power of evil, casting out the forces of chaos, and telling Satan and his minions just where they can go. Jesus, God's Son, has embraced us and claimed us as his own in the waters of baptism. These waters in which we were drowned to sin and death and then lifted up to forgiveness and new life, these waters are stronger than any storms in our lives. The baptismal waters are God's promise to us that no storm will overwhelm us. The winds will not knock us down. The waves will not submerge us. Chaos will not be the last word for our lives. The storms will come, but the last word for us is Jesus. Peace, be still. Know that I am God, and know that you are not alone. Know that nothing will come to you that I won't help see you through. Jesus, in the midst of our storms, brings a peace that the world cannot understand. It is because of Jesus that we can boldly sing, as we soon will, "No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. Since Christ is Lord of heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing?" Amen.